Radha Swami Maharaj, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai. ISKCON BBT Samstapakacharya Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur ki jai. Prem Sikho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki jai. Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gogopinath Shama Kund Radha Kund Giri Govardhan ki jai. Shri Vrindavan Dham ki jai. Shri Maya Purnavati Dham ki jai. Ganga Maya Jamuna Maya ki jai. Shrimati Tulsi Devi ki jai. Shrimati Bhakti Devi ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Harinam Sankirtan Yagna ki jai. Srila Prabhupada's Transcendental Book Distribution ki jai. Samveda Bhakta Vrinda ki jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. So we're reading from I'll Build You a Temple, the Juhu story by Giriraj Swami. October 1970 to October 1973, arriving on the scene, a good fight. As much as I was looking forward to meeting all the devotees and getting settled, I wanted to see Srila Prabhupada as soon as possible. I was told that he was staying with Mr. Padmanabhacharya on the ground floor of one of the buildings in the back of the property. The devotees were living in tents, and I put my trunk and other things into one and went to see my spiritual master. When Prabhupada saw me, he opened his eyes wide, smiled broadly, and set everything else aside. He was excited about the whole Juhu project and wanting me to see the property, stood up and personally escorted me around, walking next to me, but leading the way. He pointed out all the coconut palms. There were 140 of them, and he told me how desirable the location was, being so close to Juhu Beach. Even after seeing everything, however, I still couldn't quite visualize what the place would become. But Prabhupada said, one day this property, this land with the buildings, will be worth 1 crore of rupees. Well, it's probably worth much more than 1 crore of rupees now. Prabhupada bought it for how much? You know? Anybody here knows how much he paid for this property? Where'd he get the money? He didn't have the money. He gave Nair only a couple lakhs as a down payment and did the agreement for sale. Where did he get the rest of the money? Well, the devotees in New York had saved up money to buy a place in Manhattan. They were living in Brooklyn on Henry Street. They had 2 buildings that they connected, and those buildings are called brownstones, okay? So they were living on Henry Street, but they wanted to move to Manhattan. New York is divided into Brooklyn, Manhattan Island, and the Bronx. Uptown is the Bronx, all the way downtown is Brooklyn, and Manhattan is the main part of New York City. So they wanted to get into Manhattan. And they were saving their money. So when Srila Prabhupada wanted to make the final payment for the Juhu property, he wrote to the devotees in New York to send the money that they had saved for buying a place in Manhattan. Now, Srila Prabhupada started this movement in New York, and he was very much concerned about the preaching in New York, but at the same time, he very much wanted this project in Juhu, so much so that he took the money from New York to finalize the purchase of this property in Juhu. But the devotees really didn't appreciate it so much. They just thought it's far from the city. They were living in a nice flat in Akash Ganga, and all they had to do was go out the front door, and they were downtown. And they were making life members. So they couldn't really understand why Srila Prabhupada was interested in this property. Let's see where. One day, this property will be worth 1 crore rupees. In those days, 1 crore, 10 million rupees was unimaginable for me. All we had in the bank were a few thousand. At most, 2 or 3 lakhs. And that was the result of 1.5 years of work. Returning from the walk with Prabhupada and a small group of devotees one morning, Madhavananda, Madhavisa pointed to the property and exclaimed, "Hare Krishna land." And that's how the Juhu property got the name Hare Krishna land. Like the famous American theme park, we too had a major center of attraction. But instead of the central figure being a cartoon character, it would be Krishna, the chanting of the Hare Krishna. So Giriraj Swami is referring to a theme park in America called Disneyland. When Indians go to visit America, they have to go to Disneyland. I've never been there, Disneyland. There's 2 of them, one in California and one in Florida, Orlando, Florida. So they're what's known as theme parks, Disneyland. So he's mentioning here that just as they have Disneyland, now we have Hare Krishna land. So there the main character in Disneyland is who? Anybody know? Mickey Mouse. He knows everything about American culture. Mickey Mouse. Right? Walt Disney, one day he was very poor. He was living in a garage. He was an artist. And he saw one mouse run across the floor. So he made a cartoon caricature of that mouse, right? And that became Mickey Mouse. And he made cartoons, made a lot of money, and then he opened up and he made other characters, Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck and so many other characters. And from that he had Disneyland. So the center of that Disneyland mentioned here is, a cartoon character, Mickey Mouse. But the center of Hare Krishna land is Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So they have Disneyland, we have Hare Krishna land. Remembering from a walk with Prabhupada, returning from a walk with Prabhupada, a small group of devotees, one morning, Manavisa pointed to the property and exclaimed, "Oh, Srila Prabhupada, they have Disneyland, so we shall call this Hare Krishna land." And that's how the Juhu property got its name, Hare Krishna land. Like the famous American theme park, we too had a major center of attraction. Prabhupada had asked me to come to assist Madhavisa, but when I arrived, I heard that Madhavisa was not doing well. He was sleeping late, going to the beach, and generally not performing his duties as temple president. Finally, Prabhupada concluded that Australia would be a good field for him. He would have more opportunity to perform Sankirtan there, and Prabhupada expected he would regain his enthusiasm. With Brahmananda soon returning to Africa and Madhavisa proceeding to Australia, Prabhupada had to find someone to fill the position. He called a meeting with his senior disciples. I was present, but more, I thought, as an observer. I was not among the most senior or important devotees, and I had never had a say in such matters. To begin, Prabhupada asked the question, "So, who will take charge?" No one said a word. The atmosphere was charged with anxious uncertainty. From behind the low table, Prabhupada looked up at the group and then directly at me. "So, Giriraj," he said, "you will take charge?" I was stunned, silent. I didn't know what to say. This was not at all what I had been expecting. In fact, it was the last thing I could have imagined. I had come to Bombay to preach and develop the life membership program, and had neither the inclination nor any special ability to manage. This project was on a whole different level, and the responsibility seemed too much for me. Still, I knew that obeying and pleasing the spiritual master was the secret of success in Krishna consciousness. So somehow I managed to stammer, "Well, Srila Prabhupada, if you want me to, I will." I didn't feel comfortable with the idea, but I couldn't refuse Prabhupada. "Yes," he exclaimed with a bright smile. A day or two later, I went into Prabhupada's room and sat down in front of his desk. "So now, Giriraj," he began, "the whole responsibility is on you." I winced, and he chuckled. I couldn't understand why Prabhupada was laughing. Didn't he know how I felt? He seemed to be rubbing it in. rubbing it in. I rarely had such thoughts about the spiritual master. Why am I thinking like that? I asked myself. But I was also wondering, how could Prabhupada be so insensitive? I am reluctant to take the responsibility, and he's rubbing it in by saying, now it's all on you. And on top of that, he's laughing. Srila Prabhupada was laughing because he was going to be there at every step to help Giriraj. So it was not really all on Giriraj. Prabhupada spent a lot of time here, spent a lot of time with Giriraj Swami instructing him, and I think he was laughing at the fact that Giriraj thought it was all on him, because it certainly wasn't. At the same time, I understand that the spiritual master could discern what was best for his disciple. And based on all our experience with Prabhupada, I knew that he must have foreseen that my taking responsibility for the project would be good for me, even though that was hard for me to imagine. I just had to surrender. I had heard that whenever the spiritual master gave an order, he also gave the potency to execute it. And I knew that for the project to be successful, Prabhupada would have to empower me to act on his behalf. Every evening we performed an artik for our Radha Krishna deities on the stage of the pandal, attracted by the dancing lights and the kirtan booming from the speakers. People would come from throughout the surrounding areas and park their cars around our property and alongside the road, and Prabhupada would speak to an assembly of about 500. On Prabhupada's last night at the Pandal, he spoke about the 6 Goswamis and their feeling of separation from Krishna. I could tell that he was addressing the devotees and that the visitors would not be able to understand. But he had spoken to them for half an hour, and he knew he was speaking to us. He quoted the last verse of Sad Goswami Astika. He Radhe Brajadeva Ke Chalalite Nanda Suno Kutaha Shri Ghovarna Kalpa Vipada Tale Kalindi Vhane Kutaha Goshantav iti sarvato brajapure ke nair mahavivalo Bande Rupa Sanatano Rajuyago Sri Jiva Gopalago. The Goswamis were chanting very loudly everywhere in Vrindavan, shouting, Queen of Vrindavan, Radharani, O Lalita, O son of Nanda Maharaj, where are you all now? Are you just on the hill of Govardhan, or are you under the trees on the bank of the Jamuna? Where are you? These were their moods in executing Krishna consciousness. Said Goswami Astikam, text number 8. As Prabhupada spoke, I began to see what he was doing. He would soon be leaving Bombay, and knowing that we would be feeling separation from him, he was preparing us to enter the mood of service in that state. Powerless to stop myself, I began to cry. From Bombay, Srila Prabhupada was going to Australia. Before leaving for the airport, he paid his obeisances to Shri Shri Radha Krishna and stood before them for some time. Then he walked out to the car, and I opened the door for him. I got into the back seat next to Prabhupada, and devotees crammed into the front seat with the driver. The rest of the devotees rushed to catch rides with life members who followed behind. At the airport, Prabhupada was given a VIP room, and we all crowded at the feet, eager for the last darshan before he departed. Accompanied by the ringing of kartals and rhythmic thumping of mridangas, Madhavisa led an aesthetic kirtan, and the rest of us held our arms in the air and danced with abandon, jumping wildly up and down. The outside world ceased to exist. If you go on having kirtans like this, Prabhupada said, when we ended, your Bombay project will be a success. So this is an important point. The devotees did an enthusiastic kirtan, and Srila Prabhupada said that if you go on doing kirtan like this project will be a success. So we can understand that our real effort should be to increase Sankirtan. We see in the life of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu that he didn't build any temple. He didn't build any temple. He was living in Jagannath Puri, and what was he doing? He was performing everyday Sankirtan. He'd go to the temple with the devotees, and he would chant, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. But we see later on, his followers, especially the 6 Goswamis, they made temples. They built temples. Rupa Goswami built which temple? Govindaji. And Sanatana Goswami built which temple? Madan Mohan. So like that, they made some temples. Why? Why did they make temples? The Yuga Dharma is not temples. The Yuga Dharma is the chanting of the holy name. Hare Nama, Hare Nama, Hare Nama eva kevalam. Kalo nasteva 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 gatiranyata. So why did they build temples then? Who can tell me? Why? The Yuga Dharma is chanting Hare Krishna. People become self-realized by chanting Hare Krishna. Then why build temples? Mahaprabhu didn't build any temple. He didn't build any temple. Then facilitate the chanting. Why? What? We can go out in the street and chant. We can chant under the tree. What? Being in a building? What? How that facilitates chanting Hare Krishna? Yes. The general people can't chant outside the temple with us. Many times I've been in kirtan, and the general people also, they chant. They come and chant. When I was in Nairobi, not less than 100 people all the time would stand there and see the kirtan. And those people would go, another 100 people would come and watch the kirtan in Nairobi. So then, what was that instruction? No, but why he told them to establish temples? Why? What's the reason? The reason is, although the method for self-realization is chanting the holy name, the temples are established for deity worship because the age of Kali is so contaminating that one, along with the chanting of the holy name, needs to be engaged in the service of the deity in the temple for keeping on the pure platform, keeping their consciousness pure. And another thing is, although chanting the holy name is the Yuga Dharma, people don't have so much taste for the holy name. They'll chant 1 hour, 2 hours, and then they'll fall asleep. So in order to maintain purity, the deity is established in the temple to keep our consciousness elevated, to keep our life fixed in cleanliness. Right? How to be clean. People don't know how to be clean, right? They don't know what cleanliness is. Bahut muchi hai. Sab log bahut muchi hai. They go to the bathroom, they don't even wash their hands. Right? So deity worship teaches us cleanliness, how to be clean, right? You can't go and worship the deity in, ganda kapra, muchi kapra, right? It says in the Nectar Devotion, you can't use clothes that went to the dhobi. Not allowed. It's an offense. If you use clothes that you sent to the dhobi for worshiping the deity, that's a seva aparad. Why? Because the dhobi is ganda, his water is ganda, everything about him is ganda. You can't wear clothes that's outside people ironed, right? No. So to learn all these things, then only you can engage in worshiping the deity. So your consciousness will be elevated, right? That's why the 6 Goswamis established temples. Everything is very scientific. That reminds me about the last time Srila Prabhupada left here. He was sick. He was staying in his new quarters. And the devotees decided that Srila Prabhupada was waiting for the temple to be completed. And I had just come from America. I guess the rainy season was just about over. And I was part of Gargamuni's library party. Actually, I got traded. Gargamuni had a mechanic who wanted to go back to America, and he wanted to get a trade for that mechanic who was going back to America for a book distributor. So I was, in those days they used to trade devotees like you trade horses or something, So I came here and Janapavana went there. So when I got here, Srila Prabhupada was there. He was very sick. And we were, devotees would go and do a little kirtan for him. That time, Tamal Krishna Maharaj was the servant. So they had a little discussion what to do. Prabhupada wasn't well, whether he should stay here till the opening or go to Vrindavan and come back. And there was a lot of construction work going on there. They were still carving marble, a lot of noise. It was a construction site. So they decided that Prabhupada would go to Vrindavan and rest there, and then when the temple opened, he would come back. And that morning, they decided that instead of going by flight, they would go by train. And the reason for that was because the rainy season had just finished. And in those days, the road from Delhi to Vrindavan after the rainy season was kind of like the road from Calcutta to Mayapur after the rainy season. Have you ever been on the road from Calcutta to Mayapur after the rainy season? It's impossible. There's chuck holes all over the road. You can only go like 20 kilometers an hour because every short distance there's a big chuck hole. So it was like that. Now the roads are much better. Even after the rainy season, the road from Delhi to Vrindavan is pretty good. And now they have a superhighway from Noida. But so the jerking in the ride would disturb Prabhupada too much, so they decided they'll go from here by train and then come back. It's only a short distance from Mathura to Vrindavan. That was the plan. So just like we see here, Prabhupada would call people for a meeting. He called them to decide, and they decided Prabhupada would go to Vrindavan and then come back when the temple was open. And Prabhupada was very happy about that. When the time came to board the plane, Prabhupada stood up and distributed the garlands hanging around his neck. We offered our obeisances at his lotus feet, and with respect, and with passport, boarding pass, and immigration form in one hand, and his white plastic case in the other, he walked toward the passport control booth. We followed him as far as we could, and then watched his saffron clad golden form disappear from sight. We again offered our obeisances, then stood paralyzed, as if the world had come to an end, until we could pull ourselves together and walk away. How, I wondered, would we manage in Juhu without Srila Prabhupada? There with us, his words, if you go on having kirtan like this, our Bombay project will be a success. Were encouraging. And I knew he would present, and he would be present by his spiritual potency and instructions. But we had also depended on his personal presence, the gravity of the situation, and the weight of the responsibility felt overwhelming. Back in Juhu, I offered my obeisances in front of the deities. More than ever, I felt dependent on their mercy, not knowing what to do. Next, I sat down before them and prayed for guidance, for the ability to help fulfill Srila Prabhupada's vision of a beautiful marble temple for them and a Krishna-conscious training center for the devotees and others. Reflecting on how enthusiastic Prabhupada was about the Bombay project, I took heart. Even though we were neither experienced nor qualified, his pure desire would surely prevail. Actually, at one point, when the permission to build was not coming, Srila Prabhupada said, it's all right. He told Giriraj Swami that if we don't get permission to build, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. He said, we'll make this like a bus stop. And buses will come filled with devotees. They'll load up with books and they'll go out again. You know, like we have Juhu Circle, there's a bus stand. They come, they get passengers, and they go out, right? So Srila Prabhupada said this Hare Krishna land would become like that, a bus stand. Sankirtan buses. They'll come, load up with books, and then they'll go out again. Again, we always have to keep in mind that yes, we have the temple for our purification. We have the temple also to attract visitors. But our real business is Sankirtan. Right? We should manage everything very nicely so that the Sankirtan goes on, because that's our real business. Distributing Srila Prabhupada's books is Sankirtan. Right? The books are Shabda Brahma. That's why Srila Prabhupada asked us not to set them on the floor. And just like the deity on the altar is there, the books are also deity. Books are also deity. It's a form of Krishna in the form of his instructions. Srimad Bhagavad Gita is the Krishna Upadesh. Krishna's instructions and Krishna are non-different from him. Just like Giriraj Swami was thinking that Srila Prabhupada's instructions are there, so he's with us. He's still with us, even though he flew off on the plane. So Krishna may not be before our eyes as he was 5,000 years ago, but his instructions are with us. What we should do, what is the purpose of this human form of life? But today, people are so fallen. They don't want to hear what Krishna said. They want to hear some mad interpretation from some rascal who doesn't know what Bhagavad Gita is, right? Who wants to minus Krishna. Bhagavad Gita minus Krishna, Prabhupada said, with some mad interpretation. Bhagavad Gita are the words of Krishna, Krishna's words, Krishna Upadesh. But they want to use the words of Krishna to make their own philosophy. Prabhupada cited many times about the interpretation of one big scholar, very big scholar. He was also in the government. He interpreted Krishna's message in his own speculation. Right? Krishna says, Manmana bhavamad bhakto. Manmana, think of me, Krishna says. But this was interpreted by that person to mean it's not Krishna that you have to think of. You have to think of the unborn that is within us. Now who is he to say? Krishna is saying, Manmana, think of me. And he's saying, no, don't think of Krishna, think of the unborn. What is that? Who are you? That you'll change the words of Krishna? Right? This is the problem. Right? They want Bhagavad Gita minus Krishna. No Krishna. Right? A mother politician says, if there ever was a Krishna, what is that? If there wasn't a Krishna, then what is the value of the Bhagavad Gita? It's, right? Shri Bhagavan Uvacha. It's not somebody's imagination. You can go to Kurukshetra, the place where Krishna spoke the Bhagavad Gita. It's there. And actually it's a perfect place for a battle, actually, because it's all flat, right? No one can get an advantage by being on a hill. In a battle, if you have the upper portion of the land, you can get some advantage because the enemy has to come up and you can have more of a defensive position to fight the enemy. But in Kurukshetra, there's no such advantage because it's all flat. You been there? It's all flat, fields. Kurukshetra. It's an actual place. It's a historical event. It's not some imagination. Krishna spoke the Bhagavad Gita on this day of Ekadasi, over 5,000 years ago. Arjuna, the great warrior, was feeling despondent because he had to fight his relatives, his grandfather, his teachers, his cousin brothers. So he was having second thoughts. And Krishna spoke the Bhagavad Gita just to help Arjuna understand what was his duty, what he should do. Similarly, the Bhagavad Gita, the message of Krishna, is there for us also. Arjuna actually was just simply posing as bewildered. He's a great devotee of Krishna. But for our benefit, he posed as bewildered so that Krishna can enlighten him with the instructions of Bhagavad Gita so that even today, 5,000 years later, we can take advantage of those instructions. as to what should be done and what should not be done. So, people are in Kali Yuga, Prenayalpa Yayushu Sabhya Kalavasmin Yuge Janaha Mandasu Manna Matayo Mandabhagya Hupadrutaha. They're very short-lived in Kali Yuga. Right? And they're very slow, manda, they're very slow to spiritual life in Kali Yuga. And manda mataya means that even if they're inclined to spiritual life, they get misguided by some cheater. Right? And there's so many. Right? One rascal says, I don't read Bhagavad Gita because I don't want to disturb my consciousness. What is that? I'm already high level, so I don't read books. What, rascaldom? The words of Krishna will disturb your consciousness? Rascal. And all the people, oh Guruji, what do you think? Manna matayo. Andai and andai rupaniyamana. A blind fool telling all it, follow me, everyone will go in the ditch. Mandabhagya, unfortunate. People are so unfortunate. They don't know what is the goal of life. The people are leaving the villages, crowding into the cities, right? For money, working very hard, night and day. Go home, they also have to open their laptop, do more work, right? Very unfortunate. They have no time. No time. Their master is not Krishna, their master is the paycheck. And they squeeze every drop of energy out of them. And they think, oh, because I have a big paycheck, I'm successful. What is your success? Next life, you take birth as a dog, then what is your success? Only thing that can save them is the message of Krishna, Bhagavad Gita. So therefore the devotees, knowing the purpose of the Lord and trying to be merciful to the conditioned souls, they put forward, they go out and they request people to please take Bhagavad Gita, read Bhagavad Gita, apply it in your life, because they know that if they don't, what will be their destiny? What will be the result? This material world is a place of suffering, and people have gotten a human form of life just so that they can elevate themselves, to not have to take birth again here in this material world. But that requires instruction. It requires training. That instruction is the Bhagavad Gita. That training is the spiritual master. Right? But people are so mandabhagya, so unfortunate. They're simply chasing after money, night and day. Manushanam sahasreshu kaschidyatati siddhaye. Many thousands of them. One may be inclined to understand the message of Krishna. And we see practically You can approach many people before you find one that will take the book. So Krishna is explaining all this. And traditionally, this Juhu center has always been involved in book distribution. When I first came, there were hardly any books, actually. The first marathon that they did, I wasn't here, but the first marathon they did was a pamphlet, 25 paisa pamphlet. Was the pamphlet was Rasaraj Shri Krishna, the Reservoir of Pleasure. And that was actually printed in Mayapur. But because it was, a book, actually it was just a few page pamphlet, but it was considered like a small book. And because they did thousands and thousands of them that year, they did more points than Bhagavan did in Europe. So he was very upset that he said, our devotees are distributing Gita, and in India they're distributing pamphlets, but they won the marathon? How is it possible? And he said, these points are monkey points. So later on, and at that time, France was distributing so many books. Italy, so many books. So just after that, there was the complete Bhagavad Gita in Marathi, Jasya Tashi, complete. Before they only had 6 chapters, and it was a very bad translation. The devotees in Marathi showed me that there was one translation, it was so bad, it said in Marathi that Krishna killed Arjuna. So later on, the translation was improved, and the Bhagavad Gita was complete. Jasya Tashi. Jasya Tashi. So we took that, it was around the Hare Ekadasi time. We went to Pandharpur. Lokanath Swami was there. Akshay Prabhu was our cook. We had a German van that they drove across from Germany. And lakhs of people were coming to that Hare Ekadasi. Dindis, right? They march from Alandi, and they have mridangas and they do kirtan. Looks like our kirtan, and they chant Jai Ram Krishna Hare, Jai Ram Krishna Hare. So it was very nice. But the problem is, if you ask any one of the Wakadis, they call them Wakadis, what's the ultimate realization? The answer will be Nirakar, Sunyavadi. No form, formless. Nirgun, no gun. It's heavily influenced by Mayavadi, although they're performing all the angas of bhakti. So it's a big challenge. But anyway, that time we had 1,000 Bhagavad Gitas, and all day long the devotees were distributing that Bhagavad Gita, Jasya Tashi, and in that Ekadasi, Hare Ekadasi, we finished 1,000 books in one day. So that time I realized there's a good scope for Bhagavad Gita distribution in Maharashtra. And the next marathon, we didn't have pamphlets, we had a complete Bhagavad Gita, and the devotees went out in book distribution. We had tables all over Bombay, plus there were bus parties. And the Juhu temple defeated the Bhagavan's zone. Shri Shri Radha Ras Bihari ki. And there were no monkey points, there were real points, Bhagavad Gita. So the history of Juhu in book distribution, the glory of Shri Shri Radha Ras Bihari distributing books, a long history. And this is post the opening of the temple, just as there's one book here, complete like this thick, that is the up to the temple opening. I think we could write maybe 2 more books about after the opening, what happened. So many things. Right? But anyway, the real positive thing that happened is that lots of books were distributed here in Maharashtra. And I always used to think, well, you know, we distributed so many Marathi Bhagavad Gitas. That time there wasn't so many other temples doing book distribution in the early 80s. Juhu was doing, Ahmedabad, a little bit Mayapur, not much, not much. Juhu had the first buses with DDs in the back. Then later others copied, but first it was Juhu. I used to think, well, we've done thousands and lakhs of Marathi Gitas, what's the result? But I could see that when I went to Pandharpur for the opening and the installation of Radha Pandrinath Mandir in Pandharpur, there were thousands of devotees. They had tilak and kantimala and chanting the holy name of Krishna. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. So many devotees had been made in Maharashtra. Sometimes we think we make devotees because I gave a good lecture, I'm a good preacher. If the Paramatma doesn't inspire the person from within the heart to take to the process, right? How will they become devotees? Right? Why the Paramatma will inspire people to take to Krishna consciousness? Why? Because of your dynamic lecture? No. Because of the desire of his pure devotee. To please his devotee, the Paramatma inspires people who are destined to hell to change that direction towards Krishna by his desire, for his pleasure. There's this intimate relationship between Krishna and his pure devotee. They have this competition, right? That the pure devotee is only trying to please Krishna by increasing the number of his devotees. And seeing that Krishna is trying to please his pure devotee by inspiring people to become devotees. Right? So our effort should be to try to please Krishna's devotees, his pure devotee, especially Srila Prabhupada, our founder Acharya, because he mentioned that if you really want to please me, then distribute my books. And if Srila Prabhupada's pleased, Krishna will be pleased. If Krishna is pleased, he'll inspire people from within the heart to take up the process of bhakti, to chant the holy name of Krishna. And if they do that, they'll no longer become manda and mandabhagya. They'll become fortunate. We can see devotees, they come And by the mercy of Krishna, they're enlightened in this philosophy of Krishna consciousness, right? They're speaking the words of Krishna, helping people to understand what the goal of life is. That means they became the opposite of Manda. And even if there are difficulties, the devotees can remain transcendental to the difficulties. And because they have the process of devotional service, the chanting of the holy name, they understand properly Krishna Upadesh without some mad interpretation. So therefore they remain transcendental to the different anxieties that are there in the material world. So whether one is living in the temple or staying in the house, that doesn't matter. That's not important. But understanding the message of Krishna, Bhagavad Gita, inculcating that message in our lives, and trying to share that message with others by the sale and distribution of Srila Prabhupada's books. This will help us to establish our relationship with Krishna and to develop that relationship through service, so that ultimately after this life, or even before this life is over, we can go back home, back to Godhead. Hare Krishna. So are there any questions or comments? Okay. Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki, Shri Radha Ras Bihari ki, Nitai Gaur Premanandi.